High above the dusty ground, two big mountains stood facing each other like giant stone walls. In between them was a long green valley called the Valley of Elah. On one mountain stood the Philistine army, looking very mean and ready for a fight. On the other mountain stood the army of Israel, led by King Saul. The sun was shining brightly on their shields, making them sparkle like stars. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The air was very quiet, except for the sound of the wind blowing through the dry yellow grass and the trees. Inside the Israelite camp, King Saul was worried. He looked at his brave soldiers, including David's three oldest brothers. Eliab, the tallest brother, stood with his spear held tightly. He had a stern face and dark hair, looking very strong in his leather vest. Beside him stood Abner, the commander, checking his bronze breastplate. They were all brave men, but they were staring across the valley with wide, scared eyes. Something very big was coming out of the Philistine camp, and the ground began to shake with every single step that the mysterious giant visitor took today. Suddenly, a massive shadow covered the valley floor. Out walked a giant named Goliath of Gath. He was taller than any basketball player you have ever seen. He was over 9 feet tall. On his head was a heavy helmet made of shiny bronze. He wore a coat of armor that looked like fish scales, and it was so heavy that 5 men could barely lift it. He had bronze guards on his legs and a giant spear that looked like a wooden beam. His shield-bearer walked in front of him, holding a shield as big as a door. Goliath stood in the valley and shouted with a voice like rolling thunder. "Why are you all lined up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Choose a man and let him come down to fight me. If he can kill me, we will be your servants. But if I win, you must serve us." When King Saul and the Israelite soldiers heard these loud, scary words, they were very, very afraid. They didn't know what to do. For 40 long days, Goliath came out every morning and every evening to shout his challenge, but nobody dared to move or fight. Far away from the scary valley in the quiet town of Bethlehem lived a young boy named David. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. While his older brothers were away at the big war, David stayed home to help his father Jesse. David had a very important job. He was a shepherd. Every day, he led his father's sheep to green pastures where they could eat yummy grass and drink cool water. David had curly reddish-brown hair and bright blue eyes that always seemed to be smiling at the world around him. He loved his sheep very much. One morning, David's father, Jesse, called him over. Jesse was an old man with a long white beard and a very kind heart. He was holding a heavy bag of roasted grain and 10 loaves of bread. "David," Jesse said, "take this food to your brothers at the battle camp. They must be very hungry. Also, take these 10 pieces of cheese to their commander, Abner. See how your brothers are doing and bring back a message so I know they are safe." David was excited. He wanted to see his big brothers and help the king's brave army. David woke up very early the next morning, even before the sun was fully awake. He left his sheep with another shepherd to make sure they were safe and protected. Then he started his long walk to the Valley of Elah. As he got closer to the camp, he could hear the sound of many men shouting and the clinking of swords. He arrived just as the Israelite army was running out to their battle positions. They were shouting their loud war cry, "For Israel!" David's heart beat fast as he looked for his brothers Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah. David left his bags with the man who guarded the supplies and ran as fast as his legs could carry him to the front line. He found his brothers and started talking to them, asking if they were okay. But suddenly everything went quiet. David heard a deep rumbling voice. He looked down into the valley and saw the giant Goliath stepping forward again. Goliath shouted the same mean words he had said for 40 days. When the Israelite soldiers saw the giant, they all turned around and ran away. David was very surprised. He didn't run. David listened as the soldiers whispered to each other in the camp. "Have you seen that giant?" one soldier asked with a shaky voice. "The king says he will give a lot of gold to anyone who kills him. He will even let that man marry his daughter." David tilted his head. He wasn't thinking about gold or princesses. He was thinking about God. "Who is this man who thinks he can speak mean words against the army of the living God?" David asked. He didn't think Goliath was scary, because he knew God was much, much bigger. David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking. Eliab was already grumpy and scared, and seeing his little brother there made him even angrier. "Why did you come down here?" Eliab yelled at David. "Who is watching those few sheep in the desert?" "I know you just came here to watch the battle because you are being naughty." Eliab thought David was just a kid who didn't understand how dangerous giants were. But David just looked at his brother and said calmly, "What have I done now? I was only asking a simple question." David didn't let Eliab's anger stop him. Some of the other soldiers heard what David was saying and went to tell King Saul. The king sent for the young boy immediately. When David walked into the royal tent, he saw King Saul sitting on a chair, looking very sad and tired. David walked right up to the king and said, "Don't let anyone be worried because of that giant. I, your servant, will go and fight him." Saul looked at David's small size and his reddish-brown curls. He shook his head. "You are just a boy, David. Goliath has been a soldier since he was your age." David didn't give up. He told the king about his life as a shepherd. "When a lion or a bear came to steal a lamb from my flock, I went after it. I hit the lion and rescued the lamb. If it jumped at me, I caught it by its fur and killed it. God rescued me from the lion and the bear, and he will rescue me from this giant too." King Saul saw the sparkle of faith in David's eyes. He realized that David wasn't just a boy. He was a boy who trusted God completely. "Go," Saul said, "and may the Lord be with you." King Saul wanted to make sure David was safe, so he decided to give David his very own royal armor. "Here, wear this," Saul said. He placed a heavy bronze helmet on David's head. It was so big that it slipped down and almost covered David's eyes. Then, the king put his heavy coat of metal mail on David's shoulders. It felt like carrying a bag of heavy rocks. David looked like a little boy trying to wear his father's giant coat. He could hardly move his arms, and his legs felt very wobbly under all that heavy weight. Next, Saul buckled a long, sharp sword onto David's side. David tried to take a few steps, but he stumbled. Clank! Clatter! Bang! The armor made so much noise that it sounded like a kitchen full of pots and pans falling over. David realized he couldn't fight like this. He looked at the king and said, "I cannot wear these. I'm not used to them. I haven't practiced in armor." He carefully took off the heavy helmet and the metal coat. He felt much better being just himself, a shepherd who trusted in God's great power. David picked up his wooden shepherd's staff. It was smooth and strong, and it felt right in his hand. He then walked down to a small, bubbling brook at the bottom of the valley. The water was clear and cool. David leaned down and looked carefully at the stones in the water. He didn't want just any stones. He wanted 5 smooth, round stones. He picked them up one by one, feeling their weight. He put them inside his shepherd's bag. Finally, he reached for his sling, a simple piece of leather he used to protect his sheep every single day. With his staff in one hand and his sling in the other, David began to walk toward the giant. The whole Israelite army watched from the top of the mountain. They were all holding their breath. They saw a small boy in a simple tunic walking toward a giant covered in bronze. It looked like a tiny ant walking toward a big mountain. But David wasn't walking alone. He knew that the Lord was walking right beside him. Every step he took was full of courage because he knew that God is the real king over all the earth. As David got closer, Goliath began to walk forward too. His heavy armor went clink, clink, clink with every step. His shield-bearer was still in front of him, looking very confused to see a boy coming to fight. When Goliath finally got a good look at David, he started to laugh. He didn't see a soldier. He saw a boy with reddish-brown curls and a handsome young face. Goliath thought it was a joke. He didn't think this boy could ever hurt him. He looked at David's wooden staff and curled his lip in a mean sneer. "Am I a dog?" Goliath roared, his voice shaking the leaves on the trees. "Why are you coming to me with sticks? Come here, little boy. I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Goliath started cursing David by the names of his false gods. He wanted David to be terrified. He wanted David to turn around and run away crying. Goliath was used to everyone being afraid of him. He thought his size and his big spear were the most powerful things in the entire world. But David didn't shake with fear. He stood tall and looked the giant right in the eye. He shouted back so everyone could hear, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, David said, "but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. Today, the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down so that the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." David's voice was clear and strong, echoing off the mountainsides for everyone to hear. David continued, "Everyone here will know that the Lord does not save with swords or spears. The battle belongs to the Lord, and he will give you into our hands." David wasn't trying to be a tough guy. He was telling the truth about God's power. He knew that even though Goliath was big, God was the creator of the mountains and the stars. Compared to God, Goliath was very, very small. The giant was furious now. He lowered his spear and began to charge toward David with a loud, angry scream. When the giant started running, David didn't run away. Instead, he ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. As he ran, David reached into his leather bag and pulled out one of the smooth stones he had found in the brook. He placed the stone into the pocket of his sling. He began to swing the sling around and around over his head. Whir! The sling moved faster and faster until it was just a blur in the air. David was looking right at the small opening in Goliath's bronze helmet. Goliath was laughing as he ran, thinking he would crush David easily. But David let go of one of the strings of his sling. The stone flew through the air like a tiny, fast rocket. It zipped across the valley straight and true. It didn't hit Goliath's shield, and it didn't hit his armor. The stone struck the giant right in the middle of his forehead. It was a perfect hit. The stone sank into his skin, and Goliath's eyes went wide with surprise. For a second, everything in the whole valley went completely silent. Then, something amazing happened. The mighty giant, the man who had scared a whole army for 40 days, began to wobble. His knees shook, and his spear fell out of his hand. Slowly, like a tall tree being chopped down in the forest, Goliath fell forward. Boom! He crashed face first onto the ground. The earth shook so hard that the soldiers on the mountains felt it under their feet. The great giant was defeated. David had won the battle with just a sling and a single smooth stone from the water. David ran over and stood over the giant. He had no sword of his own, so he used the giant's own sword to make sure the battle was over. When the Philistine army saw that their champion, their biggest and strongest soldier, was dead, they were terrified. They turned around and ran as fast as they could. They didn't want to fight the army of a god who could help a boy defeat a giant. The Israelite soldiers let out a giant shout of joy that echoed through the entire valley of Elah. The men of Israel and Judah rose up with a mighty shout. Hooray for David! Hooray for the Lord! They were no longer afraid. Seeing David's courage had made them feel brave too. They chased the Philistine army all the way to the gates of their own cities, Gath and Ekron. The valley that was once full of fear was now full of the sounds of victory. King Saul watched from the hill, amazed. He had never seen anything like it. The boy shepherd had done what a whole army of soldiers couldn't do. After the battle, the Israelite soldiers returned to the camp and gathered all the things the Philistines had left behind. They found beautiful tents, tasty food, and shiny treasures. But David didn't care about the treasures. He picked up Goliath's heavy bronze armor and his giant sword. He knew these would be a reminder of how God had helped him. David's brothers, including Eliab, looked at him with new eyes. They weren't angry anymore. They were proud and a little bit embarrassed that they had been so scared. King Saul turned to his commander, Abner. "Abner, whose son is this young man?" The king asked. Even though David had played music for the king before, Saul was so impressed by his bravery that he wanted to know everything about his family. Abner replied, "As surely as you live, O king, I do not know." The king told him to go and find out. Everyone wanted to know more about the boy who wasn't afraid of giants. David was brought before the king once again, still holding the giant's head. When David reached the king's tent, he was still wearing his simple shepherd's tunic, now a little dusty from the fight. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked with a voice full of respect. David bowed low and answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." Saul smiled. He knew that David's life would never be the same. From a simple shepherd boy to a great hero, David had shown everyone that with God, Even the smallest person can do the biggest things. Word of David's victory spread quickly all across the land of Israel. People in every town and village began to tell the story of the boy, the giant, and the 5 smooth stones. Children would play in the streets pretending to be David with their own little slings. They learned a very important lesson that day. They learned that being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. Being brave means trusting God even when things look really, really big and scary. David became a symbol of hope for everyone in the kingdom. David went back to see his father, Jesse, in Bethlehem for a short time. When Jesse saw his youngest son coming down the road, he ran to meet him. He hugged David tightly. He was so happy that his son was safe and that God had used him to save the country. David told his father all about the valley, the giant's roar, and the way the stone flew through the air. Jesse listened with tears of joy in his eyes, realizing that God had big plans for his youngest boy. David didn't become proud or mean because he was a hero. He remained the same kind boy with the bright blue eyes and the reddish-brown curls. He knew that the victory didn't come from his own strength, but from God's. He continued to write songs and play his harp, thanking God for his protection. He knew that no matter how many giants he might face in life, God would always be there to help him. David's heart was full of peace because he was a friend of the Creator. And so, the story of David and Goliath reminds us today that we don't need to be the biggest or the strongest to make a difference. We don't need heavy armor or giant spears. All we need is a heart that loves God and a spirit that is willing to try. Just like David, you can face your giants, like being afraid of the dark or trying something new, by remembering that God is always with you. The same God who helped David in the valley is the same God who loves you today.
I'm so happy you're safe. God used you to save the country. The stone flew right through the air and he fell. God has big plans for you, my son. Remember, you can be brave too, because God is with you. Remember, you can be brave too, because God is with you.
Support us by following us and we will follow you back. Also like, comment, and share our videos. Thank you for watching.